What's up, guys? In this video I'm going to show you how to extract broken bolts. I'm going to kind of just discuss a bunch of different topics on extracting bolts, and then I'm going to show you some extractor sets that I like to use that have worked out pretty well for me in the past. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Also hit the like button. I want to thank all my new subscribers. Also want to thank all my members as well. All right, first off, why do these bolts break? Why do you need to extract them? Well, one of the most common reasons is that the bolt breaks when you're trying to remove it from whatever, whether it be an engine block or whatever, and it's seized up, it's corroded, and it'll have, rust build up on the threads, and as you're trying to remove it, it breaks off, and it'll leave part of the bolt. Either it might break off inside of the base of where you're removing it, it might break off flush, or it might be protruding out of the base of whichever you were trying to remove that bolt from. So we're going to discuss that, and then also bolts will shear off, and when that happens, luckily it's usually easier to remove that broken off stud, because it could be where it's not corroded at all. But what happened, like I'm going to show you on this engine here behind me on this commercial John Deere mower, one of the bolts had come out, another one had come loose, and so there's 4 mounting bolts for that engine on the frame, and just that movement of the engine rocking back and forth sheared off a bolt that is still in the engine block now, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to remove that. And that's actually, if you own one of these mowers, that's actually a common thing that I see happen, is these bolts will break off or come loose over time. And on some applications, on some mowers, like a lot of the Kohler mowers, you can just you don't really have to worry about retaining the original threads as much, because oftentimes they'll have kind of like a little foot right here where you could just drill it on out. You can see the top of the bolt as it comes up, and you can just put a nut on the other end of the bolt. They'll come up from the bottom. This one is not like that, so it's going to be more critical for me to keep these threads intact, or at least have to put a thread insert. But it's much more critical when you don't have that option of just having like that little foot engine mount style on the engine. This one's actually a Kawasaki. A lot of the Kohler motors have that other style like I'm talking about. So this is going to be a little bit more critical. So guys, what I've already done, I've already removed the PTO clutch. I have a video showing how to do that. I also have a video showing a repair that eventually every John Deere commercial mower is going to need, and that's that anti-rotation flange. And on this one, I do have a video showing how you can avoid buying that expensive service bracket, they call it, from John Deere, and you can weld in a bushing here. I got a video on that. I also have a video on how to remove that clutch, as well as how to change this drive belt. All right, so share the videos, like the videos, all that good stuff. So I've already removed everything, and our broken bolt is right here. I'm going to shine the light right here so you guys can see it. So it's a steel bolt inside of an aluminum housing, and you can see where we have, before it broke off, it was hitting this frame. It was moving around. This flange hole is okay. This is the other bolt that was missing. I've already removed the other ones. This one was in, and this one was in, and as you can see, the threads of the bolt were hitting also this flange from the movement of the engine. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to drill out. I'm going to get a center punch, and I'm going to punch right in the middle of that bolt, and then we're going to try to extract it. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a center punch and tap a little indention into the middle of that bolt. So now that I have the my little center punch hole knocked into that bolt, it's time to drill out the hole. Now a lot of times what you can do is you might get lucky and you can use some of these reverse left-hand threads drill bits, and basically what they do is they work in the opposite direction, cutting in the opposite direction, so as it's drilling the hole, it's spinning to loosen that bolt, and you might get lucky and it might just, the bolt might come out. That's kind of rare, and that's not going to really usually happen in the instance where the bolt has seized up. You might get lucky on the bolts that have sheared off or something in this case. Another set that works really well is this style here. You can see I've used this one already before. These work really well. It's kind of like a square, twisted, it looks like a punch, and what you do is you drill out the hole. It'll have a drill bit recommendation for the size right here, so it says use what does that say, 9/64 drill for 1/4 inch to 5/16 studs. I think that's what that says. Yeah, 9/64. Need some glasses. So these work really well. What you do, you punch that in and it gives a really good bite, square bite on that stud, and you can just use a wrench or something, a pair of pliers, to extract it out. Next up is this spline type set. It also will tell you the recommended drill size, and it has these little splines that as you go to loosen it, these splines cut up into it. So what you want to do, take this and knock it with the hammer up in there really good, and then just start twisting it out. And those work really well, but you can see how short this is, so it really works better. You're kind of limited to how deep that broken off bolt might be into the base of what you're trying to drill out. Now for bolts that are broken off deep, Blue Point makes this screw extractor set. Works really well. If you ever have one that's broken deep down in a hole, it gives you some little drill bit guides right here you can slip in. It comes with 5 different sizes here, and it comes with some drill bits, and the drill bits aren't that special, but they're just rigid brand drill bits, and they are not covered under warranty, whereas the rest of this is covered under warranty. And I've broken off several of these flutes, they're called, little extractors, and they're covered under warranty. But you use that drill bit with that size, and then what you do is once you got that hole drilled, you knock this down into the hole, and then you take this and slip it over, and you can apply a socket or a wrench to it, so it fits on like that. So you can see how long it is. Gives you a pretty good reach for a lot of applications. So after determining which extractor I'm going to use based on the application and the size of the stud, now that will determine what size drill bit to use to drill out the broken off bolt or stud. So I'm going to try to set up this camera where you guys can see me just knock this thing in. Since this was a sheared off bolt, it was a lot easier to extract versus it being a rusted or corroded, seized up bolt. And since the female threads were not damaged, I'm going to be able to just reinsert a new bolt, and I'm going to apply some red Loctite. And you can get this red Loctite in liquid form or stick form. I prefer the liquid form, but the stick form is pretty easy to use. So now I'm going to tighten down these bolts. And this job is now complete. And just real quick, I'll show you the part number for this set. It's C0407. And my splines type set, this one is a 15-piece set. It's REX15B. And this is a Blue Point E-1020. And it has this red case here. So guys, as you can see, that was really easy, and it leaves this square right there, so it gives a really good bite on that stud, on that bolt. Works out really well. Now, one thing I will tell you is if you ever use one of these spline type sets, and if you keep drilling too big, if you drill too big of a hole, you will basically, as you're trying to use one of these, like for example, if I were trying to use like this set bit here into this stud or bolt, let's say this was just a perfectly drilled out hole, and as you're trying to, if you go use too big of one for that stud, it's going to spread out that bolt, and so it's going to be kind of counterproductive to what you're trying to do. If you drill too big, it's going to try to expand out that stud as you insert this, so just be aware of that. You would not have that issue with this style, because as you can see, these are tapered, and so as you're going into that bolt, it's kind of pressing out, expanding that stud. All right, guys, so let's pretend for a moment that my vise here is the base of whatever our stud has broken off into, and let's just say it's kind of flush, or maybe just protruding just a little bit, or even if it's recessed in a little bit. If you have a welder, you can take a nut, and it doesn't have to actually fit the right size, be the right size, but it just needs to give you enough clearance to get some weld down in there, and that heat is going to heat up the stud. You want to get good penetration into the bolt that you're trying to extract, as well as the nut, and then let it cool off. And then as I'm cooling it off, what I like to do is spray some penetrating oil like WD-40, and let it just fully cool off, and then that nut gives you a good thing to put a socket or a wrench on. And I've extracted hundreds of broken off bolts that way. It works really well, but it takes some skill. I recommend using a MIG welder is the easiest to do that with. But if you don't have a welder, what you want to do is take a grinder, and because it's probably not going to be perfectly flush, take a grinder, just kind of knock it nice and flush. You won't be able to do that if it's recessed down below the surface. But what you want to do, you want to get that center punch and get a good hole punched right in the center. So if you can grind that nice and flush, that's going to make getting a nice center hole punched a lot easier. So once you have a nice center punch there, go ahead and start drilling. If you don't have a welder, you can just use one of these types of extractors. Now, I would recommend, just starting out, get a good center punch, a good set of drill bits, and if you're the first set of extractors, I would recommend this style here. Oftentimes you can, and you may be required to go ahead and just drill everything on out. If it's heavily corroded, which is most likely why it's broken off into whatever you're trying to remove it from, you're going to have to apply some heat and some penetrating oil down in there. But worst case scenario, there's been many times where I've just had to just step on up and drill out, carefully drill out to the point where you're almost touching the threads. And that's why it's critical to get into the center of that bolt, which I didn't do here. I'm off center a little bit, but you need a good drill also. Alright guys, so if you do have a welder, and you can do this with a MIG stick or TIG welder, but it's going to be easier with a MIG welder. But I'm going to show you the MIG, or the welding trick. Just get a nut. Let's say your bolt, we're pretending that my vise is the base of what we're trying to get the broken stud out, and it doesn't matter if it's a little bit recessed down, flush, or protruding a little bit. You can still do this if you have a welder. Obviously it's going to be easier if it's flush or protruding out. Just get you a nut. It doesn't have to fit the actual stud, just needs to give you some room to make some weld to the stud and to that nut. And then you're going to see a lot of heat build up in that stud, and then you're going to want to let it completely cool off, then apply some penetrating oil. Now you can use a nut that is a lot larger if you're good at filling up a gap like that. That's fine. That's what's going to make that MIG easier. Or you could just put a washer to help you fill up that void there, and that'll also help you keep from accidentally welding to the base. And one other caution I would recommend doing, just another tip, is ground to the nut. That way you don't get arc jump. In other words, if I'm ground to the table or the base of whatever I'm welding to, and I start to arc, it's going to arc from the base metal over into the threads, and it's just going to give you more issues, especially if it's rusty, got a lot of corrosion. It's going to try to arc jump, and it could kind of make more contact between the threads and the male and female threads. Just like when you're welding on something on a table and you ground to the table and you weld, there's arc jump. It kind of sometimes does a little tack in the little piece, whatever you welded. Let's say, for example, I was welding on this top of this washer. It arcs between the table and the washer, and it'll stick. Alright guys, so what I'm going to do, when you go to do this, you want to have that cut off that wire first so you get good contact, get close to it, and I'm just going to go straight down. That way I get good penetration into that stud, and then I'm just going to let it kind of build up, and then just start keeping working away into this nut here. So let's get started. I'll show you. Alright guys, so now what that's done, that's created a lot of heat, and we're just, like I said, we're just pretending that we have a x-ray vision view. And so now would be the time to start putting that penetrating oil on the side, and see how that penetrating oil is going to go down those threads. And you want to let this thing cool off before you try to extract it. And you want to try to keep your weld from building out past the side edges of that nut. That way you can just nicely fit a socket or wrench onto that nut. But let it cool off. And another thing you could do to kind of just help out is tap it a few times with a hammer. Because what we're trying to do, we're trying to send some shock waves and some penetrating oil and everything between the female and male threads, and all those little things are going to help. So that heat is going to expand and then contract. So that's going to help break up that bond that has occurred. Alright guys, so if you do not have a welder, I'm going to show you basically what I would do to apply some heat. This is for really sticky situations. We got some bad threads here that we're pretending that is seized up into our base here. I've already put a center punch, so what I would recommend doing first is center punch, drilling the hole, trying an extractor before applying the heat. So let's go ahead and drill out for our extractor. And of course I would go ahead and apply some penetrating oil. WD-40 is a good penetrating oil, plus it's also good for cooling your drill bits. Now you're not lubricating the drill when you're drilling like this. You're basically, the whole purpose of it is to keep what you're drilling into and the bit as cool as possible. So technically water would even work better than nothing. Now once you have your hole drilled to the appropriate size for the size of the extractor that you need, for the size, and the extractor that you need is going to be determined on the size of the bolt that you're trying to remove. So right now we've got the hole drilled out nice and deep, and you're going to try that extractor. You're going to hammer it in at first, and then let's say you've worked it in and you're not having any success of removing the bolt before. You definitely don't want to break off an extractor inside of that bolt. That's just going to make it even more difficult for you. So now we're going to say we've already applied some penetrating oil. Let's pretend now it's time to apply some heat, and this works whether or not it's protruding out of the base, flush. Still do the same thing. So if it's protruding out, applying some heat with the butane torch is going to be a lot easier. But let's say, for example, you have a flush mount. Okay, let's say it's flush, and you don't really want to apply a lot of heat to the base. What you can do is use a washer. That'll help give kind of a shielding area between your torch and the rest of the base. We're wanting to heat this up and then let it cool off. And if you have a big gap right there, you could even do another one right here, and that's going to really penetrate, put the heat down into the stud. It's going to help drastically keep this. It's still going to get this hot, but it's not going to get it nearly as hot as that stud. Alright guys, to demo this, I'm going to show you that so right now we got our base here. Let me back this camera out just a little bit so you can see better. So 84 degrees on our base here, 90 degrees over here, and this is probably pretty hot because it's still cooling off from me drilling, so we're at 91. And what I'm going to do is use a butane torch. I'm going to apply some heat using these washers, and I'm going to show you how much hotter we can get this stud down here versus over here. And real quick guys, I'm going to change it up a little bit to make it even better. I'm going to stack this smaller washer right here, and in this case, in a lot of times, if it was a flush mount, this would work pretty good. This washer that's a little smaller, now we have like an air gap between our base and that stud, and then I can sit here and just maybe stack up some other bigger washers, and that's going to give several layers that the heat would have to transfer through to start getting to this base. It's okay that we get this hot, depending on your application. You don't want to get like an engine head real hot in one area or whatever, but you're trying to just heat this up as much as possible by leaving this alone, because we want that heat to expand and contract. All right, guys, so you notice how it's going out when I'm trying to go down like this with my torch, because these are going to only operate with it kind of at an angle or right side up, which will be fine if you had a extracting, trying to get a bolt that's sideways or overhead. But one thing you can do in this case is, after you've drilled the hole already, find a bolt that will fit as snugly as possible in that hole. All right, then just sit there and heat up that bolt, and that's going to transfer the heat. Now ideally, if we could cut these threads off, which I can do, and get a smooth contact surface with this other stud, it will do a lot better, because right now it's going to take a long time to heat through those threads. So if I could get the shoulder of this bolt making smooth contact with this and then heat that bolt up, it's going to send the heat down in here. So what I'm going to do real quick, so now fits real snug down in there. So now I can keep my torch up here and just heat up this bolt really hot. Now guys, if you had an oxygen and acetylene torch, you'd be able to put heat right straight down into that shaft, but since I don't have one here, and chances are you may not have one, this is a cheaper option. Just a little bit more time consuming. Alright, so now let's see the temperature difference between our base and the we're at 99, 100, 152. That's a lot hotter, but we're trying to transfer it over into here, so you can see what a difference it makes when it has to just jump between one layer. Now once you would remove the heat, remove those washers, apply your penetrating oil, and let it fully cool down, and then try your extractor again. Alright guys, now once you've tried all of those things, that should work. And then one other thing I want to mention is the tightening and loosening method. So even before, let's say you have a bolt that isn't broken off and it's really hard to remove, try to tighten back and forth a little bit, tighten, loosen, because basically all you're doing is you're just trying to break up, the corrosion that's happened in those threads between the male and the female side of those threads. And normally, they've seized up, and you can just loosen that up, send some shock waves through it, just wiggling it back and forth, and then casually working its way out. Now, this video has already gone very long. I know I've covered a lot of things in this video. It's already like 30 minutes long. So that last ditch effort is when you have to just basically drill it out and tap it out. I'm going to save that for another video. But do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm when you guys hit that like button. Also share the videos. And I'm just trying to help you guys save some money. All these methods and things that I've shown you in this video has not only saved me a lot of money, it's made me a lot of money by extracting bolts for other customers. So anyway, I'll have more videos like this coming soon. I'll do one about drilling out and tapping new threads and using tap inserts like a Healy coil or thread repair inserts. So again, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.